Let's talk video editing, a subject I know a tremendous amount on. And today I want to focus specifically on narrative or documentary editing, basically anything that's not interview style, okay? And one of the prevailing logics that you will hear talked about is when you edit a first pass, you should do it without music. And overall, I agree with this for the simple reason, right? The idea behind it is that at the end of the day, you want it to be strong enough where it stands on its own, and then music and everything else can enhance it, right? Now, I don't make it a hard and fast rule because there are certain things that you want to edit to music. For example, if you know something's scripted as a montage or specifically jump cuts, right? And then I think music is appropriate because in many ways, if you had a scene that was jump cuts and it didn't have music, it would look awkward. The music gives you permission to have those jump cuts. So if you know you're going to do that, then it only behooves you to already edit with that in mind, with, the pacing of the music that's ultimately going to be there. It's going to be composed by your composer, or if you already have the song, great, all that stuff. So that's kind of a first thing is, when you approach it, you try to have it as bare bones as possible, but for certain instances, the bare bones works against you, right? So you need, the bare bones becomes what's the core idea of what this moment, this scene is trying to accomplish. And if it requires music to accomplish that, then you put in the music. Secondly, a big thing that a lot of novice editors grapple with is this idea they're always so focused on making sure that there's a continuity to everything. And yes, of course, you want there to be continuity as much as possible. You don't want it to be jarring and, catch people off guard and so forth. But you will be surprised how many things are forgivable because it's based on emotion versus the actual continuity of things, right? And that's what you want to be cutting on, is ultimately, if you have to make a choice between continuity and emotion, lean into emotion, okay? Again, the perfect world is the two would align, it would be a perfect marriage, symbiosis, blah, blah, blah. But especially as you start to, whittle things down and having to adjust, in your finer edits and so forth, then that's when continuity starts to go a little bit. Because, think about it, there's oftentimes like one of the tricks that, we employ in editing is we'll shift a scene that was supposed to go later to earlier because it just fits better narratively, right? And then it's like, okay, well, how do you square that hole? And so you try to make it work as best as you can. But sometimes, again, you just have to do it based on emotion, right? And just another sort of quick tip. Again, this is not meant to be, by the way, an in-depth lesson, just kind of quick how-tos to get you started, is you always want to be sort of cutting on motion, right? So if someone stands up to go somewhere, cut on that moment as they're standing up. You wouldn't have them stand up and then cut to, a close-up shot of them and then have them start walking. That would look very awkward. So you always want to be cutting on motion. And when you do that, that's when it looks smooth, right? And part of cutting on motion, again, this goes back to that idea where continuity doesn't really matter. Because if you literally, let's say, had someone standing up and you cut the shot from when they're standing up to, let's say, that close-up to the exact point that they were when they were standing up in that wide shot, then it would look disjointed. Instead, you got to cut based on, headroom and things of that nature, and it becomes a cheat. Again, you would be so surprised how often this happens where, people try to just hone in on that continuity and it doesn't work. Especially on cuts with, that motion, you're cutting based on where the eye is already kind of interpolating, right? And to that effect, right, my fourth tip is cut around action you don't need. So, for example, I learned this from Kevin Bright, who was one of the executive producers of Friends. He was a teacher at my college, Emerson College, when I went there. And he would tell me that, if you ever watch Friends, notice when someone's like leaving the apartment, because, they'll start off on one side of the apartment, like at the total end, and the door is whatever, I don't know, let's say 40 feet away. And within like one split second, they will go from one end of the apartment all the way to the end and be leaving it, right? Because we don't need to see them leave. We want to accelerate the pace. So part of film editing is that it is not meant to be real time. That is a tool in your arsenal if you need it, but that's for a very specific reason. I mean, that's why oftentimes, use single shots to play out that real-time aspect, and you don't cut. So anytime you are cutting, it's to manipulate time a little bit. Now, of course, that could also be for angles and purposes and things like that. But generally, if you want more things to play out in real time, you keep it as a single shot. But when the action is totally irrelevant to the story, it's not needed, then like with Friends, if someone needs to leave the apartment, you don't need to watch them walk from one end of the room to the next. Literally, within 1 second, you create it with cuts and then them there. And it doesn't look jarring to the audience ever. In fact, most audiences, I almost promise, have never noticed that. But now that I bring it up, I'm sure they'll be watching for it, right? That sort of a thing. So, these are a couple of tricks to keep in your arsenal as you get started with editing. When it comes to documentaries, especially, oftentimes to make sure that you're able to compress, and for an interview and documentaries, you don't necessarily want to have jump cuts. At least I don't love them. Then you have to use B-roll, right? Something to convey what it is that they're talking about. And in fact, when it comes to documentary work, like one of the things that brings it production value is the ability to paint the picture that someone is describing within an interview. So, there you go. That's something specific to documentary themselves. So I hope these few tips help. I wanted to kind of introduce them, because they are so basic, but they can get you really, really started well. And what I would encourage you to do, if you want more tips and a more in-depth thing, let me know kind of the things that perhaps you're struggling with, or, if you already know what you want to learn, I'm happy to deep dive and perhaps even do like an actual tutorial where I open up my, editing sessions and kind of guide you through certain things. But hopefully this was just like a nice little complete starter kit of editing. So thank you as always. I appreciate you and hope to see you next time.